Hello.
Welcome back to the Space Gulag. It's the final episode of the Earth series. Before we begin, special thanks to our patrons and to all of you guys for making this mini-series happen. Season 1 has been a great joy to me. I'm so excited for you guys to see this final episode. Our story picks up amongst the celebrations in the streets of Zenzao. There's a celebration across the city. They survived Abeloth, and while there was victory, there was the onset of something else. The Council of Earth sat quietly inside their council chambers, looking over the first reports from every planet from Kessel to Earth. Every planet was destroyed, trillions were dead, and planets were entirely ripped apart by Abeloth herself. The council sat in solemn thought. They all discussed quietly. The sound of fireworks ricocheted off the walls of the city, and the celebration went into high gear. The council admitted that they believed it were time for a galaxy-wide change. There was an issue, and the issue sat at the middle of the galaxy. It came from the Emperor, and while his run was good, the government of the galaxy needed to be more central, especially since the Copernican system was currently taking care of the entire Outer Rim, which currently needed the assistance of the entire Empire. The Council of Earth looked at their data, and they knew that a simple transfer of power wouldn't be in. The reason being is that the people of the core were strictly loyal to Palpatine, so the people of Earth would have to suggest that Palpatine step down from his throne. Palpatine was inside of his penthouse apartment. He was gifted when he came to Earth. It was a private residence that looked over the Imperial District of Zenzao, while also having a luxurious look at the rest of the city and the landscape that surrounded it. Palpatine was feeling into the Force. He kept the vase with him, as a means to get rid of Abeloth that was held inside of it. Palpatine felt into the Force and realized that he had previously felt wasn't Abeloth. It was something else, and Abeloth was currently just masking the presence of what was to come. Because what was creeping across the galaxy was something that could be much worse, of an issue for the Empire than that of Abeloth. While the galaxy needed Palpatine to save them from Abeloth, Palpatine couldn't stand in the way of the true power that crept across the galaxy. Palpatine also knew that members of the Council of Earth would likely suggest to him to step down from his power threshold on the galaxy. He knew that to do this would allow him the ability to take the vase containing Abeloth and rid her of existence, while allowing the remainder of the Empire to deal with this threat. In other words, it would make the galaxy look weak without him, and so they would have no other choice but to request him to return to be their true leader when they faced this new power coming across the galaxy. Palpatine knew that the Council of Earth was in talks, and so he showed up to meet with them and informed them that the reign of the Empire was going to be handed back over to the galaxy. Believing that at this point in time he needed to step away from the politics of the galaxy. The Council was absolutely shocked to hear this, but it made their job even easier. They no longer had to worry about accidentally creating a civil war with the rest of the galaxy, especially the core. Palpatine informed them that he would have his office on Coruscant handle the entire thing for them. They would begin to receive support from Coruscant, and the holdings that they were given from the core worlds would be split up and budgeted for them to assist them with the rebuilding of the Outer Rim. The Council listened to make sure that there weren't any terms of which Palpatine could do anything to take back his power. Palpatine, having been the leader of the Empire and the Republic for half a century, was too brilliant at playing the political game. He was older than most of the people inside of the council chambers, and so he got his point across without having to make up any lies. Everything he told the council was true. The only difference was when he got to Coruscant, the contract would be written up in the best way he legally could to ensure that his reconquering of the Empire would be as flawless as possible. There would be no need to worry about any fighting over territory or trying to get the Empire to side with him on anything. All he would have to do is return from his vacation and take down the Empire that grew in his absence. Of course, this was something that the people of the Empire wouldn't learn about until it was much too late. Same as it was with the Old Republic. On a side note, Palpatine had a much more important thing to worry about, like the maid who was about to bear his ungodly creation, the Force. The epitome of what would become the true evil successor to his reign. Whether it be a son or a daughter, Palpatine did not know, nor did he care. He did know that he was going to allow the galaxy to suffer without him, so that they would realize the importance of loyalty to his bloodline. Palpatine departed from Earth, leaving the entire council in a state of shock as they all looked over and watched the Emperor depart from the room. The Council of Earth then realized that they would have to begin delegating power, considering a majority of the Imperial fleet was stationed over Earth, and they had trillions of credits that were meant for spending in the Outer Rim. Palpatine eventually departed Earth, and so the Council decided it was time to start moving their resources. Palpatine didn't leave with the majority of his fleet, nor did he leave with his flagship. He took a regular Imperial II Star Destroyer back to Coruscant. Palpatine would use the power of legalese to delicately move all of his power that he needed into positions of leverage for him so that when he needed it, he could use it. Palpatine never wanted to be obvious about his plans, and so his plans were formulated in the wording of an entire legal document that would be left behind for the Empire. Palpatine correctly assumed that the Empire would have a lot of infighting in his absence, especially due to the power that the core believed they deserved. The truth is, Palpatine knew that hyping up the Copernican system would allow them to feel the confidence to rightly take on the core worlds. Palpatine also strategically left a majority of the Imperial fleet behind so that the core would feel threatened by the Copernican system, all of which that large fleet being stationed over Earth. After everything was signed over by his office, Palpatine would take the Maid from his throne and disappear into space towards an ancient homeworld of the Sith called Exegol. On the planet of Exegol, Palpatine would have his very own daughter, a being created of the Force, much like Anakin Skywalker. She would be named Rey Palpatine, and she would be the heir to his evil throne. While Palpatine certainly didn't want to raise a child, it would be easier of a task for him to do than what he left behind for the Empire to take on. On another note, Palpatine would begin working to drain the life of Abeloth out of the Viz and terminate her existence for eternity. This was the main project of Palpatine to work on until he felt the time was right to return to his galaxy. On Earth, the Copernican system took its foot and slammed it down into the political atmosphere of the Empire. While they didn't suggest that they were going to be leading the Empire, they did on the other hand suggest a plan of action to deal with the absence of the Emperor. Earth was already weeks ahead of the rest of the Empire because of their knowledge of Palpatine taking a step down from his power. Truthfully, the Copernican system thought it to be best to keep the entire Imperial fleet present over Earth, but they also decided that for the betterment of the galaxy, to dispatch the fleet into the Outer Rim to serve as a relief effort to the people that suffered. While the people of Earth, after celebration, would have to pick up the mess left behind at Thebes after Abeloth's showing, they would get to work on other parts across the galaxy. The Council began to delineate its credits to each respective world across the Outer Rim, as they began to work on projects that would help the Empire restore itself. They had no knowledge of what Palpatine was running from, and the truth is, Palpatine had no knowledge when it would be here. He just assumed it would be here because of how powerful the Essence was, even after the death of Abeloth. But the truth is, he was completely off of his prediction. The Council of Earth began to receive harsh ridicule from the people of the core. The Copernican system didn't take any credits from the Imperial Reserve, rather they were just doing what was best for the people of the Outer Rim with the credits they received from the core earlier that year. The Council knew that the representative planets in the inner core would take it personally that Earth wasn't spending money on what they wanted them to spend it on, though the truth is the money did belong to Earth. All the money that Earth used was for the greater good of the Empire, not for the greater good of Earth. While there was certainly a large issue present on Tatooine and across the other worlds scattered across the Outer Rim, the Council had faith that they could pick up the pieces. The largest issue was the fact that there were so many dead because of Abeloth. On Tatooine, there was only a few thousand survivors, one tribe of Tuskens that hadn't been wiped off the galactic map, and half a tribe of Jawas. The planet was in absolute turmoil. Almost all the work that had been done in the past 20 years vanished, though there was benefits to it. The ocean still remained, and while most of the structures were destroyed, there was still a chance to rekindle what had been lost. The same could be said for all the damaged planets, all across the pathway to Earth. The people of Earth saw this as a chance to rebuild an already depleted Outer Rim. It would force the Empire's hand into going into the Outer Rim and cleaning up the mess. While it would have been nice to stop Abeloth before she ripped half the galaxy apart, the Council was happy that they could still positively affect the galaxy. Though the galactic map was turning into a political drama, Corellia had led a coalition of core worlds that wanted to return power to the center of the galaxy. The Copernican system was confused by the heavy-hearted response made by the core worlds. While yes, they certainly expected this type of response from the core worlds, they didn't have a good way to quiet down the heaviness and anger coming from those core worlds. The truth is, the core was threatened, and they were trying to assert dominance without the help of Palpatine, something that wouldn't really work, because Coruscant was trying to return to power itself, due to its location at the center of galaxy. Again, Earth was simply attempting to help the bereft worlds across the Outer Rim, and while the core tried to bargain for their credits back, they came to find out that the Council of Earth found a means to spend almost all the credits they had received for the Outer Rim Fund. All those said credits were spent inside of the Outer Rim, exclusively, aside from the credits used to rebuild the Supremacy. The Council of Earth dispatched a majority of the Imperial forces out into the Outer Rim, informing Thrawn that in the power vacuum, without the Emperor, the Outer Rim would likely be the place where most rebellions, pirates, or scoundrels would surface. His job was to provide relief and to take out any insurgents. Thrawn was perfectly fine with this, because working with the Copernican system with him was always a joy. He still believed there was a sole reason for the victory of the Empire over Scarif, and especially due to the fact that they were the ones that constructed the TIE Defenders. Though currently the Saturn drive yards were pumping out medical cruisers and relief cruisers, the Copernican system was doing everything in its power, especially as the rest of Imperial control opened up to them, to help the people of the galaxy. Not only did they realize Palpatine did some shady things behind their backs, he did shady things in front of them and passed it off as normalcy, such as the enslavement of the Wookiees and their usage as slaves. There were many cases of this throughout the entire galaxy, and the Copernican system wouldn't stand for it. As the Council understood, it was the Jedi that helped the Copernican system move past slavery nearly 3,000 years beforehand, and they wouldn't stand for such barbaric traits within the Empire. The truth is, Earth was operating without much consent from the core. Earth took control of an empty mantle and began working exclusively with Palpatine's administration that was still stationed on Coruscant. And because the core worlds were so focused on what Earth was doing, they didn't realize that a majority of the power in the galaxy still sat in Coruscant. Regardless, the Council of Earth decided to move the Death Star back to Scarif, and to take the 1.5 million employees stationed on the Death Star and move them towards relief efforts across the galaxy. There were still about 200,000 employees still present on the Death Star to keep up the basic maintenance of the space station, but the Council believed a majority of the population would be better suited elsewhere in the galaxy, and they were correct about that as well. The Copernican system even began to promise some of its own resources to planets with enslaved populations, realizing the travesties of the Empire was truly horrific for the Council, and they truly believed that reparations should be paid out to the people who suffered because of the Empire, and so they promised the Wookiees, for example, a new construction on their home world and the promise of security from the Trandoshians as they put a small blockade of Imperial defense cruisers outside of Kashyyyk to defend the Wookiees from their lizard hunters. As Earth began creating a foothold in galactic power, planets from around the core, mid-rim, and outer rim would rally beside the Copernican system, not as a system of loyalty, but more so as a system of governance that wouldn't just be housed inside of one planet. The people believed that they could help the galaxy out if they all came together. This coalition became known as the Copernican Coalition, and the people of Earth rallied behind it. The only issue with this is that there was an issue with that seen from within the core. The issue being that the core didn't feel in control, almost as if Palpatine made them treat him with the utmost loyalty just for him to favor Earth. It was unfair and it was blasphemous. The core was certainly a product of their luxury, and the fact that others could achieve that same luxury intimidated them. While yes, the core had the Kuat drive yards, it didn't measure up to what the Saturn drive yards could accomplish. And while yes, the core had their own academies, they didn't measure up to what the Academy of Zhenzhou could accomplish. And while yes, the core had its own military that was outfitted by the Empire, it still didn't match up to the combined power of a leader in Thrawn, the Eclipse, the Supremacy, and the little moon-shaped space station called the Death Star. Though Earth wasn't one to show off its firepower, they had no reason to, because to the Council, they weren't competing with the core, they were working to establish a better galaxy. The people of Earth believed that they would be best served if they worked together in unison with the rest of the galaxy, because working with the rest of the galaxy would help guide a sustainable future. The truth is, the first couple months after Palpatine departed the galaxy began to find unison. It wasn't quick or even immediate, it was simply the beginning of a new resolve towards peace. While yes, the Copernican system was leading the way there, it was a combined effort coming from a multitude of planets across the galaxy. They all worked in unison to get rid of labor camps and slavery, corrupt establishments were reduced to useless power, and the Empire focused on rebuilding itself in the Outer Rim. Over the few months, the Saturn drive yards were able to establish a foothold of relief in the Outer Rim. While the damage that was done to the Outer Rim would leave generational damage to the people of the galaxy, it would also be up to the combined minds of the Empire to find a way to overcome that and help make the galaxy a better place. The span of a few months saw real damage. The relief effort in the Outer Rim was quadruple what it had ever been, which meant that everything on each and every planet that was needed was reconstructed. While the entire population of planets like Tatooine had just about vanished, the Empire was making sure that as the population returned, there would be a sound place to call home for those that grew up there. The growth across the Empire would be astounding. While it would of course take time for the core worlds to rekindle a relationship with the rest of the Empire, it would allow the bond to grow extraordinarily. Because the issue wasn't coming from the people of the core, the issue was coming from each core's world's individual government. When the time came, the core would unite its governmental forces together to assist the greater Empire. When this happened, and only when this happened, did Earth suggest to reconstruct an Imperial Senate, without a monarch, and tear down the former office of the Emperor while establishing a new order of government. While the government of Earth didn't inform the people of Earth about the Emperor, they made sure that they took precautionary measures to ensure that there could be never a singular monarch in the galaxy. The Copernican system saw the atrocities committed by the Empire and believed that there were absolutely no reason to allow that type of behavior to exist in the galaxy. The Council of Earth would lead this reconstruction of the new Senate building on Coruscant, along with corresponding Senate buildings across every single collaborative planet in the Empire, meaning that every planet with a senator would have a place to bring the government of the Empire. The reason this was suggested was so that every individual within the Empire could feel as if their voice was genuinely heard by the Senate of the Empire. When the Empire came to visit each Senate building across the galaxy, they'd be forced to see what was happening in that sector of the galaxy, on those planets, and in that system, and whether or not the senator of that particular system was playing a political soap opera or genuinely trying to ask for assistance. This was also tighten the bond between worlds in the core and in the Outer Rim, especially. Palpatine, who was still an Exegol, hadn't foreseen such a collaborative work between the Imperial worlds, because he thought he left a big enough divide between the Mid-Rim and the core. Not that he expected an all-out civil war, but he did expect tension until his return. Though on another note, Palpatine believed there was supposed to be an evil force entering the galaxy. But because that force didn't make itself present, there was no conflict and absolute union. Though there was one struggle for the Empire, and that was a decision to demilitarize. The Copernican system didn't stand by the side of demilitarization because they made a lot of their credits off of the drive yards, and there was always the fear of those that could do them harm. The Empire itself had a solid year and a half since Palpatine's departure, but the conflicts of politics erupted in the Senate of the Galactic Empire. And while debate was positive, the larger issues present to the greater Empire were their struggles of the Outer Rim. Though Earth had seemingly begun the project by throwing trillions upon trillions of credits at each respective planet, more needed to be done. The Empire needed to deposit itself within the Outer Rim and establish itself as a head honcho in the galaxy out there. There were still several issues in the Outer Rim, but with the established military presence in the Outer Rim, there was an increasing decline of these groups of insurgents. The Copernican system sent its best contractors to the Outer Rim to set up everything that was needed for each respective system. For the longer part of 19 or more years, the galaxy would find the greatest unison that it had seen since the time of the High Republic. While there were no Jedi left in the galaxy, it also felt like there were no Sith left in the galaxy. Palpatine was the one who was the most disappointed with all this. He threw away all the power in the galaxy because he felt a disturbance in the Force. He felt like a true fool. And the issue was, he knew he couldn't just come out of the shadows because the Empire had no real reason to target each other. They had completely united. There were also only a few people who served within the Empire who actually missed Palpatine, though most of the individuals that missed Palpatine were military personnel. The most prominent of these was General Pride, who had served valiantly with the Empire for Palpatine's main fleet during their dealings with Abeloth. He ascended the ranks and kept a spot on the Imperial hierarchy because he was good enough to be there. Though Pride found it disingenuous to serve the scum of the Outer Rim, he had an old galaxy perspective of the Outer Rim. He was an old-fashioned Imperial. He wasn't bred out of the Copernican system. He was created within the core on Coruscant. There was a severe difference between the academies in the core and the ones in Zhenzhou during Palpatine's reign. The ones inside the core focused on oppression and servitude to the Empire, while the ones in Zhenzhou focused on the power of a united front. This resulted really well for the Empire because most of the individuals from Zhenzhou actually progressed throughout their career without having to backstab another individual to find success. General Pride was one of these very few members of the Core Academy to reach such a high rank within the Empire. On another note, the Empire itself was becoming better all around, as they all focused their efforts in building around the Outer Rim. It wasn't straightforward by any means, but the cities across Tatooine were rebuilt within those 20 years, and the first generation of post-Abeloth Tatooine had rose to adulthood. It was the same across all the corresponding planets from Kessel to Earth. The galaxy was finally healing. The Council of Earth was especially happy because of all their hard work in the Outer Rim beginning to pay off. Planets across the galaxy began to value the Outer Rim worlds as upper-class societies. Of course, with older generations, especially those with members still alive from the era of the Republic, they would see these planets of the Outer Rim as second-tier planets and systems with second-tier citizens. People that didn't deserve the luxury of a prideful empire. But the truth is, once those people started dying out, the newer generation was excited to explore the Outer Rim. It was an exciting place in the galaxy to go. Certainly a lot of planets became amateur central. Tatooine was a tropical destination that was more affordable for younger individuals, especially those who liked the party. The gambling ring was rebuilt on Tatooine, and the art of pod racing drew in a lot of young individuals to Tatooine for spring break and so on. A few planets in the Outer Rim had the same effect, one of them being Nal Hutta, which became more of an edgy rave location for young adults of the Empire, and of course, who could forget Kamino? That planet, after having been the birthplace of a clone army nearly 70 years beforehand, became party central. A couple kids from Anaxis, who came from powerful, rich families, accidentally went to Kamino, to which they investigated it to find the ruins of Tapoka City left behind. They decided to bug their parents for a small loan of a couple billion credits, and they built a facility on Kamino that sat above the water. It became really special as a place for kids to go party. This then turned into a resort of sorts, as they built a water world full of wave pools, slides, and just about any attraction to drag any young adult from across the galaxy to Kamino to party. As the saying goes, the rich stay rich. Because the kids made back quadruple their investment. They were able to buy off a small loan that they got from their parents, and they made enough money to buy out entire city blocks on Coruscant and become landlords for one of the most expensive planets in the entire galaxy. Their families were built on the wealth of the Imperial War Machine. One of the kids' last names was Gent, to which the resurgent class Star Destroyer was named after their family. The price of being an arms dealer, isn't it? Regardless of the party palaces across the Outer Rim, there was really defined lines for people of the galaxy. The Mid-Rim became known as a place of artistic individuals and families to go. The core was a place where politics, business, families, and learning transpired. And the Outer Rim was essentially a place where young adults went to familiarize themselves with fun and the excitement the galaxy had to offer. Of course, this was certainly generalizing, as each representative planet had each of the previously mentioned attractions, but for people leaving their home world for opportunities elsewhere in the galaxy, that was the main gist of why they went there. After 20 years of peace, the Council of Earth finally began to slowly shut down its massive war machine. Not that they cut off the Saturn drive yards, because they could still produce vessels, but more so they shut down the war machine of the Empire. It was actually Earth that led this regime towards demilitarization. While originally they were against the idea of it, a new administration entered the Council of Earth and helped bring a new unseen level of success to the galaxy, which in turn ended up to resulting back to the lack of a need for a strong military. The big thing was that the military would still exist. The academy at Zhenzhou would still remain, but they wanted to focus more of their annual budget towards more important programs. This went into expansion on Tatooine, as the Copernican system still had a direct tie to the planet. Tatooine was a spring break destination for the people of Earth. Of course, people from Zhenzhou could go to the Mediterranean or vice versa. The truth is, just staying on Earth was lame. People wanted to experience life under the twin suns, and I mean seriously, so many fun places to visit on Tatooine. While success seemed to be the name of the game in the Empire, especially without Palpatine, the long-foreseen trouble finally arrived in the galaxy. An entire population was forced out of their galaxy, and so they came into this galaxy to wreak havoc and take over the galaxy for themselves and re-establish what had been lost. Palpatine and his daughter Rey could feel this. The Yuzhang Vong made themselves present on the far side of the galaxy, towards the top of the galactic map, when they came in and smashed into Molinist. Instead of being a total wipeout like it was with Abeloth, there was a fighting chance, but that fighting chance began to diminish as millions upon millions of Vong entered Molinist, fighting the planetary defense. The Empire was immediately alerted by this, and they sent a fleet to assist the people of Molinist. The Senate of the Empire alerted everyone in that quadrant of the galaxy that there was a new galactic-level threat. The Empire rallied together, the supremacy was lifted away from Obadiah and dispatched towards Molinist. They weren't really sure what was playing out across the galaxy, but they did know that the Empire was under threat. They had done so much right, and now they had to defend their honor from a real opponent. Of course, the Earth had the suppressed pirate regimes that popped up from time to time, but other than that, this was the first real threat they'd seen since Palpatine's departure. Admiral Thrawn, who was still holding control of all the Imperial forces, made a much larger push to the far side of the galaxy, though he was unsure if there there would be more enemy forces elsewhere, deciding to station a weaker hand of the fleet outside of the core in the case of the enemy getting around the fleets that he sent out with a counterstrike. The Yuzhang Vong bounced off of Molinist and claimed themselves down around the system of Yavin 4. When the Empire got to the destroyed planet of Molinist, they were outraged. For most of the crew, they were either too young to remember or not even born when Abeloth tore apart the Outer Rim. Now they got to see firsthand what the previous generations had to witness. It was terrible. An entire civilization burned to the ground, and there was nothing left, and no one had survived. The Empire would have to pick up the pieces in the future, but right now they had to focus on what had done this, and how to take the fight to them. Probe droids were dispatched across the entire side of the galaxy, and yet nothing came back. Weeks would pass by without any sign of a foe that had ripped through Molinist. The Empire was on high alert, and every soul from Ilum to Tatooine had the thought of carnage on their minds. People had nowhere to flee, because there was nowhere that was safe. While yes, the Empire had an overarching control over the entire galaxy, they didn't have the manpower to effectively defend every star system in the galaxy. And while the Empire was pulling itself together, the planet of Naboo was hit and ripped apart. There was a sizable fleet over Naboo too, but the fleet size didn't matter because of the overwhelming force that the Yuzhang Vong had. Naboo was wiped off the face of the galaxy, and so the only thing the Empire could do was dispatch a fleet towards Naboo to try and solve the issue. When they got there, the Yuzhang Vong had vanished yet again. The Empire was concerned, though they knew that if they played their cards right, they could stand up to the might of the Yuzhang Vong or whoever their foe was. It was just a matter of finding them and destroying them. Admiral Thrawn couldn't yet pick apart a pattern, and he expected to find them another couple weeks away, from a combat zone popping out and attacking again somewhere else. It was just a matter of where or when that would happen. A couple weeks down the line, Kessel would be hit and obliterated. Luckily for the Empire, Kessel was mostly a remote world that didn't utilize much. And even better, the Yuzhang Vong trapped themselves on the other side of the Kessel Run and the Arcades Maelstrom. Admiral Thrawn deployed the Supremacy and a ton of other Imperial vessels to the Kessel Run to await his foe. At the same time, he moved General Pride inside of the Eclipse back to Coruscant to await further orders. Pride was perfectly fine with this. While the Empire was distracted, a force returned from the depths of Exegol. He and his daughter made their journey across the galaxy. They had become the new rulers of the galaxy. Of course, that was the plan, and Palpatine had been feeding that information to Rey her entire life. All she knew was that she had power, and because of that power, she was destined to become the Empress of the galaxy. Regardless, the Imperial fleet arrived outside the Kessel Run, and they prepared for a fight with a foe they had never seen before. This foe had ripped apart 3 different planets, and their threat was definitely noticeable. By this point, the Imperial fleet had upgraded itself, outfitted with Imperial Advanced 3 Star Destroyers, along with a Surgeon 2 class Star Destroyers. The Supremacy was an older model vessel, but the Empire didn't really have a need for a Super Dreadnought or a Mega class Dreadnought model anymore. The Supremacy was the one and only, and surrounding her were several support ships in the form of one of the Dominator-class Star Destroyers. Thrawn's flagship was still the Chimera, and she was outfitted with some of the most powerful weaponry the galaxy had ever seen. The heroes of the Empire sat themselves outside the Kessel Run for the Battle of the Ages. Thrawn positioned the fleet in every strategic placing he could just to ensure that his foe had no place to run. Thrawn's plan was to choke them out, and so when the Yuzhang Vong marched out of the Kessel Run, war began. The Dominator-class Star Destroyers released several of the Mach 2 TIE Defenders, and the first fight began. Thrawn's strategy looked perfect on paper until he realized what he was up against. It was the full power of an entire other galaxy, a galaxy now destroyed. This foe was coming here to colonize their own galaxy for themselves, and to eliminate the power threat, which was the Empire. On Coruscant, the Empire itself was on the verge of crumbling. This wasn't due to some power flaw or even a gripe between senators. It was the Palpatines. They had returned to assert dominance. When Palpatine learned that one of his most loyal dogs was guarding Coruscant, he couldn't help but make his move. He knew the battle was upon the Empire, and he could just use this moment to take great advantage of the power gap in the galaxy, especially since General Pride was one of the only few ranks lower than Thrawn that had enough power to easily take control of the fleet stationed outside of Coruscant. Maybe even enough leverage to pull in others from around the core. Though the core wasn't exactly the same as it used to be, they didn't see others in the galaxies below them, and they had no issue with the outer rim or the mid-rim. So the idea of them bending at the knee upon the arrival of their former emperor was seriously out of the question. But for someone like General Pryde, that wasn't an issue, and once Imperial troopers began hearing about the massacre inside the Senate building, they made their way down to save the senators, only to be confronted by the evil Emperor and his Daughter of Doom. She carried a double-bladed lightsaber, and he used the Force to torch the people across the building, every senator becoming a victim. Sheev and Rey would kill all the opposition, using the Force as their ally to rip apart stormtroopers they had in front of them. When General Pryde lowered some of his Imperial Star Destroyers to the surface of the planet to destroy the Senate building to kill whoever was the foe inside, he realized who it was, before requesting a shuttle to take him to the ground. When General Pryde arrived, he stepped out of the vessel and confronted the Emperor and his daughter. Rey was bloodthirsty. After killing thousands of people who frequented the Senate building, an Imperial officer would add to the kill wish list. But her father stopped her, as he stepped forward and welcomed General Pryde, as he got on his knee and bowed to the Emperor and his daughter. Palpatine told his most loyal subject that they would be taking control of the Empire once again. Pryde was enthralled, realizing that as he stood next to Palpatine, he would have the most powerful position in the military, as Thrawn and Tarkin did before him. Sidious told Pryde to take his daughter with him. He would be inside of his throne room, awaiting for the Empire's return. Pryde nodded his head and took Rey up to the Eclipse with him. Across the galaxy, Thrawn's forces were slugging it out with the most powerful opponent they'd ever faced. The Yuzang Vong was ripping apart Star Destroyers like they were support ships. This didn't mean the Yuzang Vong had the advantage, but it did mean that Thrawn had to play their game, and he prepared for it by deploying 2 reserve fleets on either side of the flanks. Where there was debris, there was now power of the Empire. If Thrawn lost here, then there was a chance that the Empire would likely not survive the Yuzang Vong, which is exactly why Palpatine chose this moment to strike. Thrawn's strategy changed as he moved all the support ships and fighters on a beeline for the middle of the Yuzang Vong fleet. He wasn't convinced it would work, because he could be sacrificing all of his smaller vessels and support ships of the fleet. If this failed, then he would subsequently lose the battle and the war. All the support ships, small and medium-sized, turned their afterburners on all the way up and flew towards the center of the fleet, as ordered by Admiral Thrawn. In the front were the TIE Defenders and their elite shields. They started a heavy bombing run into the middle of the Yuzang Vong fleet, and ships began to disintegrate before their eyes. Thrawn saw it working, and then from the right side of the flank, he brought in 3 Resurgent-class destroyers and had them open up fire onto the Yuzang Vong fleet. With his supremacy, they marched forward, and so ever so slightly, all the firepower opened up onto the Yuzang Vong fleet. Everything looked to be a success until Thrawn got a communication. The communication came from the core world of Eridu. The planet erupted into civil war. The Emperor had returned. General Pryde turned against the Empire, and so did Grand Moff Gideon. His fleet stationed over Eridu turned against the rest of the fleet, who didn't pledge loyalty to the Emperor. Thrawn watched as the communication was cut. Thrawn tried to reach communication with the Senate, and when he got his message through, he was staring into the evil yellow eyes of the Emperor. Thrawn gasped. He never thought Palpatine would return, and before Thrawn could say a word, Palpatine began lifting his finger. It started to choke Thrawn and lift him from the floor in the middle of the command deck on the Chimera. Palpatine told Thrawn that the Senate was dead, the Empire was his, and the new rule of Palpatine had just begun. Before Palpatine cut the transmission, he sent the shock through the mainframe of the Chimera, sending a shock to the ship's reactor core, imploding it from the inside out. While the victory over the Yuzang Vong was remarkable to say the least, the Empire had a bigger threat, and that was the dark side returning. It was General Pryde and Moff Gideon joining the Empire of the Emperor. The fleet at Coruscant and the one at Eridu were the largest fleets in the core, and the Empire was already licking its wounds from the battle with the Yuzang Vong outside the Kessel Run. The Chimera ripped apart from the inside out, and the blast doors across the vessel were sealed, creating airlocks for the few survivors of the implosion. Most of the survivors of the Chimera were inside of the bridge. When Thrawn awoke, his vessel was torn to pieces. He was disheartened, but they still had the supremacy. Thrawn looked out the window of his ship before saying goodbye to his dearest Chimera. This would be a fight to end all fights, and because Thrawn knew about Pryde taking control of the Eclipse, he couldn't just go to Coruscant unprepared. Thrawn, with the knowledge of the destruction of the Senate, reached out to the Council, as most people in the galaxy referred to the Council of Earth as. Once he returned to the supremacy, Thrawn told the Council that he was in need of resources for this battle. The Council was already disgusted by Palpatine's return, as they informed him that all the resources he needed would be present on Coruscant when he arrived. Thrawn smiled as he rerouted the entire fleet, grounding all fighters inside of their respective vessels as he deployed the fleet to Coruscant. Thrawn pulled together all the top minds inside the Imperial fleet. Admiral Piet was present, as he commanded a superstar dreadnought, which hid behind the Supremacy. Thrawn would deploy Piet first, as Piet understood this could be a suicide mission for him and his men. Thrawn would deploy the fleet in 3 different sectors, expecting the Coruscant defense fleet to be stacked. He needed to create a clear path for the Empire to claim victory over these rebels. Thrawn had everything mapped out especially well, considering he was the one who redesigned the Coruscant defense after the Abeloth crisis. After hours of hyperspace travel and the little bit of rest the troops could acquire, the alarms were sounded. Thrawn woke everyone up and made them go to their battle stations. This was a fight for the galaxy, the fight to end the oppressive rule of Palpatine and extinguish his bloodline forever. It was 20 minutes before exiting hyperspace, and Thrawn wanted everyone to be ready. When they eventually exited hyperspace, there was already a battle taking place. When the Supremacy exited hyperspace, one of the core superstar dreadnoughts had been hit with a blast in the eclipse. The Super Star Destroyer exploded, shattering, sending debris everywhere. One of the Imperial 3 Star Destroyers was caught in the path of this destruction once it exited hyperspace, and the vessel was too destroyed. Had the ship had the time to maximize its shields, it may have survived the explosion, but it didn't. Thrawn turned and ordered every ship to make their way through the defense lines. The eclipse was the main target. Thrawn knew this would be a tough battle, but when he arrived he hadn't expected so many to rally to the side of the Emperor. The fleet stationed here was much larger than Thrawn's fleet, and it was larger than the fleet that had just destroyed the Yuzhang Vong at Kessel. Palpatine's nails were still deep into the souls of those that served in the Empire. Though the issue is, Thrawn had to reconstruct the strategy. Because the Council and the rest of the Corps decided to respond by sending every vessel at Coruscant, Thrawn had to get everything in order, but before he could, a Resurgent-class Star Destroyer, placed right in front of the Supremacy, was blown out of the sky. The entire vessel exploded, ripping apart and shattering across the exterior of the Supremacy. Thrawn looked across as he could see the eclipse bearing down on them. One of the deckhands called out to Thrawn and told him that there was a ship emerging from hyperspace. Thrawn requested to know what it was, but the deckhand had no clue. He told Grand Admiral Thrawn that the vessel was larger than anything he'd ever seen before. Thrawn said the words under his breath: the Death Star. He wasn't sure whose side the super weapon was on, but if both the Death Star and the Eclipse turned against the real Empire, then Palpatine would forever remain victorious. Thrawn demanded to get the frequency of the vessel and contact it immediately. The deckhand reported back that the ship was blocking all frequencies. Thrawn began to panic. He contacted Piet and told him to relocate to the left side of the flank, in case the Death Star wasn't on their side. Piet understood and the fleet began moving. Another shot from the Eclipse sounded off as an Imperial 3 Star Destroyer that was moving from right to left was split in half. The Imperial 3 got in the way of the Supremacy, another missed shot for the insurgents. The Death Star arrived out of hyperspace and made a very noticeable appearance to the battlefield. Thrawn watched as the super weapon began turning starboard, which really freaked him out because the super weapon lasers started turning towards the Supremacy. Thrawn demanded they contact that vessel now, but before he could, a contact came in. It was a Death Star. The voice of the station requested orders of where to fire. Thrawn demanded that they take down the Eclipse. The voice on the other side noted it and began turning the vessel ever so slightly. General Pryde saw this, and he wasn't dumb enough to not see it, and he ordered the crew on deck to forward their engines ever so slightly. The deckhands cried out, saying that there was too much power being used on the ship. Pryde whipped out a pistol and shot the deckhand and demanded they do whatever they could to move the vessel forward immediately. Rey stood next to Pryde, watching the general do his job, amused by the death of the single deckhand. The crew was able to get the engines on, but as they did, a green laser opened up and fired across the battlefield, cutting past the lines of combat and moving directly towards the Eclipse. General Pryde saw it and was blinded by the light as a Death Star blast passed by the bridge, narrowly missing by a couple dozen meters, and flying down towards the planet of Coruscant. Rey could feel it, through the Force. The moment Coruscant was hit with the blast, the entire planet erupted from the inside out. Within moments, Palpatine alongside nearly 5 trillion beings died instantly. Rey was furious as she ignited her weapon and cut down Pryde. Moments later, the Eclipse began to rock back and forth. The explosion of Coruscant was completely accidental, being the Death Star was firing at the Eclipse. It was a failure. The explosion of Coruscant caused such a force that debris of chunk of the planet crashed into the defense fleet, rupturing those who served Palpatine. The Eclipse shot one final shot per order of Rey before the entire vessel exploded, and the shot crushed through the center of the Supremacy. On the bridge of the Supremacy, Thrawn was crushed by a pillar, but accepted his fate, ordering everyone to abandon ship before the ship exploded. A captain must go down with his vessel. The Battle of Coruscant would see the downfall of Palpatine and his lineage, and the loyalists who served him, but at what cost? While the Vong may have taken out 3 planets, all 3 planets didn't have the same combined population of Coruscant. The destruction of Coruscant would weigh down on the side of those inside of the Death Star, many of them never able to come to terms with what they had done. Having fired a blast that took the lives of 5 trillion. The Council of Earth would take the burden of this. They were the ones, after all, who deployed the Death Star to Coruscant to aid in the battle. The Council of Earth realized that they became what they swore to destroy by utilizing what defied their moral code. The Death Star went against everything the Council stood for, and they paid for it. The galaxy would collectively remorse the loss of Coruscant, Naboo, Molinist, and Kessel. Trillions of people gone, entire families and bloodlines wiped out. The galaxy would have to move forward as it always did, and the galaxy would. It would take time and healing, but the galaxy would move their capital to the luxurious world of Alderaan and begin picking up the pieces of what was lost. Tyranny had been destroyed, and the bloodline of Palpatine was now forever gone. The galaxy could now take its steps forward without the influence of either the Jedi or the Sith. The galaxy would have a chance to start working away from the military, because war had gone. Generations would remember what happened in such a short period of time. All the way from the Clone Wars to the destruction of Coruscant, they would remember the cost of pain and suffering. And at the end of all of that, what the cost of losing democracy to tyranny would cause them. Healing would begin, and it would continue, being led by planets in the galaxy like Alderaan, Earth, and Tatooine and Eridu. Peace and justice would be established in a totally balanced and unified galaxy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of our series. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jonathan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Darth Cheesy, Apollo, Madman Studios, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Flynn Van Cease, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Hit 2,000 likes in this video. I don't know what's coming next, but it is. If you want to see what if, let me know below. I read over comments, but I don't do crossovers. Check out the Twitch community, Discord, Patreon, and podcast if you want to support me in other ways. This is the last day that you can get the Pride of the Earth shirts. If you were watching the full movie, the shirts are no longer available. Pride of the Earth and the Broken One are no longer available on the full movie version. Otherwise, let's talk about our story. Talk about our series. This is the full story. I mean, wow, we finally did it. I'm really excited about this. I really hope you guys enjoyed this story. And I always try and leave a deeper message. That's the true essence of Star Wars. That's the true essence of George Lucas storytelling. Is layering a deeper message in there, and it's certainly inspired by a George Lucas thing, which is like, become the very thing you swore to destroy. And it's basically that we can become what we want to destroy by utilizing what defies us. The greater lesson in the end is that while yes, Earth wins, they win at what cost? And so it's like a little moral play. It's like a play on morality and how we weigh our options. What is worth our morality and some things that we see within our morals. And so, that's kind of the thing we question as human beings. And I think that's something that's interesting that you could put into Star Wars, with Earth being a part of Star Wars, and again, without involving any sort of politics in the story itself. It's always great to include like these deeper themes and thematic devices throughout stories to tell the story. And this story has been so much fun. I've really enjoyed the story. I mean, it's very reminiscent of What If Anakin Was Never Discovered. That was my first that was like a 2.5 hour long video, and that was like the first movie I kind of ever did. And this is like really like another movie. It's like an installment, and I'm really excited for you guys to see this. And I really hope you enjoyed this, because this has been a really fun series. I mean, really, I've really enjoyed this series a lot. And so it might be season 1, but I do intend to come back with a season 2 at some point. So there's your announcement for season 2. I don't know when it's coming out, but wow, I'm getting emotional over this. It's like so cool. But yeah, I've started working on Sith Empire. There's a mini series coming out for that soon. But yeah, this has been such a fun series. I mean, just looking back at like where the journey began. It's so cool. The journey began like in ancient Egypt, and then we got here, and it's so cool how we've kind of gone from yeah, I don't know. It's really cool. I just hope you all enjoy it. That's all. And I really wanted this final episode to be really special. And I know each corresponding video has like their own ending to it, but this one I wanted to be special. I wanted the ending to feel like the end game for our series, where it's like everything's on the line. Everything is on the line. And I wanted you to feel like, well, maybe the Death Star's going to turn against them. Maybe Palpatine's actually going to win. What if Palpatine wins? I've done that before. And I don't think Palpatine would win. I think there's an end for all tyrants, and his end would come right there and then. You know, I think he might be able to sneak his way back in, but it would end in a final battle, and it's Palpatine versus Thrawn. You know, who do you think wins? It's General Pride versus Thrawn. Who do you think wins? And you know, it's almost like the balancing act. The ending of this is like really balancing. It ties off all the loose ends. Using Vong, for example, I know people were like, "Oh, you should have done that in the 5th episode." It's like there's 6 episodes for a reason. But yeah, I don't know. I'm really excited about it. I'm kind of emotional about it because like this is like the first miniseries we've ever done, like the first like real series we've ever done. So I'm really excited about this. So just remember, when the next series comes out, everything will have been pre-written before it's come out. So like when you see an episode, the next episode's already been written. And the next series is gonna be a little bit more fluid than this one. I've definitely learned like releasing order and stuff like that for how I want to do the next series. But this series was so much fun. Starting it back in I think December and finishing in February. I mean that's awesome. Like we literally did like the Kenobi show, like a six episode show. Like that's so cool. And I really hope you enjoyed this finale. The finale is, you know, Earth gets to establish its power in the galaxy. It's a leading representative in the galaxy, but the galaxy has to move forward. You know, it's always about moving forward. But it's again, you know, it's kind of the same morality that you see in like the Dark Knight, for example. I guess that could be an inspiration. I never really thought about that until like right now. Is like, you know, that you can live long enough to see to become like, or you can die here or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And I didn't really think about that because I haven't watched that movie in ages. But I guess that actually fits for this. So it's like mirroring, as George Lucas always does, like mirroring. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.